Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? This is your boy Isaac,
And this is your boy Bryce.
and we are brothers on tennis. And folks, we have such a wonderful interview for you today. This is it's not like any interview that we have done because we've done interviews with players, we've done interviews with coaches, but this time, Bryce, we get to do an interview with one of the tennis world's physiotherapists. I mean, this could be interesting, right?
Very interesting. And, there have always been very weird and unique rules around the sport of tennis as it relates to injury timeouts and most recently bathroom breaks,
Right.
and these type of things. And, so it's going to be interesting talking to someone who's actually intimately involved in these type of happenings. And then we will also find out about our guest that, his background spans even broader than just the tennis community. And I know at least one particular name that most people will probably be familiar with as well. So I'm excited to talk to him.
Absolutely. And folks, we ended up meeting this gentleman on the grounds of Indian Wells. So when we were there this past October, we happened to be walking the grounds, ran into our good friend Jaime, who happened to be talking to this gentleman. And the gentleman that we are speaking of is Noel Gressner. Now, I almost said that Z, Noel, but Noel Gressner, who is a physiotherapist on the tennis tour. And Noel, we're just really happy to have you here with Brothers on Tennis and happy to talk with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it was, good meeting you guys out there at Indian Wells. And, it should be fun to kind of talk for a little bit.
Absolutely. So digging right into it, Noah, we're very curious as to really your background as far as just in general things, where you grew up and your exposure to tennis, if you even had an exposure to tennis as you were growing up, given the fact that you're now kind of working on both tours. So give our listeners a little bit of background on yourself.
I grew up in Bristol, Virginia, which is in the southwest corner, kind of Bristol, Virginia, Southwest Virginia, East Tennessee area. And in terms of any tennis exposure, there was a little bit in the summer through NJTL. I grew up going to the boys club, and we played every sport every season. And I was including table soccer, table tennis, running laps in the gym for stars. Four square, everything that we played. So I grew up across the span playing all different sports, and some in the summer through NJTL, and then as I got into high school, my sophomore year, I started playing on the high school team, but I had transferred over from playing competitive table tennis, and I was running cross country. At the time was running. I started having some good success with running cross country, which is why I think in junior high I started leaving like football and basketball and baseball, because it seems to be that had been a path, for a college scholarship. And the guys
right.
at the coaches at the boys club were, encouraging quite a bit. And I thought, okay, maybe this is, a path that I can take. And that was one factor. My times were pretty decent, and I was training with, the high school guys, getting up at 5 a.m. and being at practice at 5:30 in junior high and running with the high school guys, and then going back over to school. And so I was running and kind of left the football, basketball, and baseball kind of behind. And part of that was because everyone else was growing and I wasn't growing. So the speed helped, and the quickness helped with tennis. But the size, wasn't, continuing. So it seemed to be not as, an impact in tennis or running than it was, maybe in the other sports. But, so that's kind of how I started in high school tennis, and ended up playing at a small college where my high school coach played also. And that's probably the only reason why I was able to, to make the team was, because of that, that connection, so, I was, playing a little bit in the top six here and there and doubles. And then as the team got weaker, I moved up.
It's funny how that works out.
Yeah,
Right?
so I don't know. I think I was getting a little bit better, but the team was getting weaker at the same time. And so I ended up maybe like in the fourth spot my senior year, as opposed to, we had a lot of good athletes from Turkey, from Peru, Venezuela, England. So I mean, it was, competitive, and I was just basically happy to be there. And what I tell people is I was an athlete playing tennis as opposed to a
Okay.
tennis player trying to become an athlete. So, and the table tennis kind of fed into that with topspin, pretty early on the forehand side. And, I don't think I found a backhand until like 3 years ago. So
I'm still searching.
So it's a little bit better now, thankfully. Thanks, to Brian Gordon, who I was doing some lessons with, down here in Miami. But I'm still, trying to get better. Just this week, I would say my forehand got better, but I mean, that could be, just dependent upon the week. But so that's kind of how I got, involved, with tennis in high school, and then, college, and then became a, teaching pro, was teaching in the summer, and, got better as a tennis player from teaching and coaching, and, kind of, was wondering whether I should kind of pursue coaching, because you can be not a good player and coach.
Right.
So you can motivate people and do a good job, even teaching and, things like that, I think, and not necessarily, I think that changes, the upper levels, what a pro guy wants to kind of have in his corner. But you don't have to be the same, level of player, to coach. But I mean, I thought about coaching and kind of ended up, in sports medicine area, strength and conditioning, physical therapy, athletic training. So.
Gotcha. And so I have a couple questions for you, Noel. So as far as the coaching piece goes, I mean, did you actually actively coach anyone? And if you did, were they on the kind of collegiate level, high school level, or other?
Well, I used coaching tennis to help pay for my master's degree at Springfield College. Nice. So I was, like when you get a GA, typically you're serving as some type of function, and coaches will get a GA and get their foot in the door with coaching and kind of network and get the experience. And I did that for tennis. So I was the graduate assistant, tennis coach, and, did recruiting, was leading practices and leading our fitness. And, the coach there was part-time. So I was on campus every day. So I would lead the team, in a lot of our stuff. And so I was a teaching pro through USPTA and PTR, which I need to renew my PTR certification here in the up and coming. But I had been PTA initially way back from like 93, and then did PTR when I was athletic trainer at Vandermeer Tennis Academy, like late 90s, and use that, number one, within what I was doing in sports medicine, but then also, I was teaching tennis through that time, and I was coaching at Springfield College, and I was one, because I like coaching. The aspect that I like in physical therapy and rehab and strength and conditioning is, it's a coaching type of mode. It's just in a different way. Yeah, it's teaching movement, it's teaching strengthening, teaching people how to get stronger, as opposed to a sport specific skill. But I like teaching and coaching sports skills, and so, on the weight training end, like Olympic lifts and squat technique and things like that. That's kind of where I flesh that out, as opposed to, I haven't taught a lesson in a few years, but, that's kind of, so I was coaching, some. Are you there?
Yep. We're here.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Yeah.
And sorry about that. We had heard you say you were coaching, and then it kind of paused a little bit.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, no, I was, doing some coaching for grad work, but then, just coaching individual private lessons and that kind of club, type stuff after that.
Gotcha. And so, Noel, what did you ever consider doing any coaching, like on the either professional tour or the satellite challenger circuit at all?
No, I think, when I started pursuing the master's in athletic training and the doctorate in PT, I kind of backed off of the kind of the coaching aspect. I didn't grow up taking lessons. I never had any lessons in high school nor in college. I was just playing and watching, technique and trying to get, better that way. I didn't have any formal background. I didn't play any junior tournaments, nothing, like that. So I think it was more so of a confidence, issue, to tell you the truth, to kind of pursue the coaching. When I was in grad school, I was praying about, should I go into athletic training or should I go into coaching? And I had applied for a couple assistant jobs, at some D1 schools, thinking that, the sports medicine aspect might be an attractive way to kind of, package myself as a teaching pro, and on the strength and conditioning side. And, those things, it didn't work out. And, I just kept pursuing the sports medicine job. So, even in, like you said, in the track world, I think for what I do, it's good if we as sports medicine professionals know the coaching side. So, going through the PTA and PTR and knowing, and understanding tennis from that perspective, but the track and field, like I had USA weightlifting certification, which is your Olympic lifts. And there are people who only coach that, but in strength and conditioning world, you use that. So to kind of know the coaching aspect of it in my strength and conditioning or rehab is a good thing. Or for me, I had, and let it also lapse, but USA track and field, you can become a track coach and get that as a certification. And there's a different progression, just like as a teaching pro can get USPTA, PTR, not that you can't be a good coach necessarily without but those are kind of industry standards that people recognize, so it's like it's a process, that people go through. So, and there's, different philosophies on, coaching and coaching technique, guys can be, or, men and women can be, successful with varying technique, and that comes down to, kind of an artistic aspect, athletic ability, all those things come into play. So.
Absolutely. So you've got your undergrad, you've got a graduate degree in athletic training, and you've got your doctorate in physiotherapy, correct?
Physical therapy. Yeah.
Physical therapy. Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Man, that in itself is incredible. All of that schooling.
Right. Because I was going to ask, how long did that take you to complete all of that?
Well, the undergrad was 4.5. I was a business major to start out with, and all the other guys on the tennis team were business majors. And in my high school, I kind of had some it was like a DECA. It was like kind of like a business club. You could start work and you got out of school a little bit early, to go work a job, and you learn business type stuff. And so I was kind of interested in that some, but then, I was also an athlete, growing up as a kid. So when I get into college and, kind of was gravitating towards health and fitness, and I had a couple injuries and went to the athletic training room and got some treatment. And I was like, maybe I can stay in something medical and stay in athletics. And that what drew me to athletic training. And so I became a student athletic trainer as a junior. And so that delayed me from getting out of undergrad a little bit, because there was, at that time, and the education has you can't become an athletic trainer now unless you go into a master's program. So at that time, I was an internship route candidate to take the certification exam, which meant I had 7 basic courses and 1,500 hours of an internship in my undergrad. So I stayed an extra semester to finish up some hours in the athletic training room, which meant, I'm traveling with the soccer team, or I'm traveling with basketball, I'm taping, I'm getting experience in the athletic training room. You're with the head athletic trainer. She's teaching you, what she knows, and you're learning in class. Or, my professor, Rita Smith, she was teaching me, all the ins and outs. And then to take the certification exam, I felt like I needed some additional education, some additional coursework. And so that's where I went to Springfield, and I got a scholarship, I think, to the boys club. And the guy mentioned, if you're going in athletic training, you should go to Springfield College. They're one of the best, schools for athletic training. So I reached out to the tennis coach. So, okay, I've already got my teaching pro certification. Maybe, I can do a GA in coaching, because I could not do a GA in athletic training, because you had to be certified in order to work into the athletic training room, even as a grad assistant. So that wasn't an option. And then I passed my certification in the second year while I was there at Springfield. And, a lot of schools. So going back to the school question, so 4.5 in undergrad, but that was because of a major and then all the internship hours and then the minor, and then 2 years for the master's degree, and then 2.4 for the doctorate. So maybe if I was a little bit more organized when I was younger, then maybe I would have tried to do MD or DO or something like that. But I think the Lord has me doing what I should be doing, because I think you put your hands on people more in what I'm doing and the daily treatment aspect, which I like, as opposed to maybe on the MD and DO side of things. So I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but it was sacrifice to go back to do the doctorate of physical therapy, as opposed to people can come out of undergrad and apply to PT school and go straight in. But I think it was critical because it's tough to get the sports medicine experience if you just go straight in without the background going in. And now where the professions they have their own stakeholdership, I guess you could say. So you can to be an athletic trainer now, to become a certified athletic trainer, you have to earn a master's degree. So there's not many people who would do undergrad and get the master's and then go back and get the doctorate, which is basically what I did. But then the undergrad for athletic, it was a bachelor's degree for athletic training. So people would go bachelor's degree athletic training and then go into PT school. But I did undergrad and then the master's. So I felt like going back, it was just making me a better athletic trainer. I wasn't trying to get out of athletic training necessarily when I went to get the physical therapy degree. I was just trying to deepen my skills, improve. And I saw a lot of people, the people that were working around when I was at the USTA, like Todd Ellenbecker and Kathleen Stroya, they were a PT. Kathleen's also athletic trainer, and anybody, and a lot of people actually that you see in pro athletics, they're both. So it's just a little bit more difficult now because you can't become an athletic trainer unless you're on a master's degree. And for someone to spend that money and then go back to do the doctorate, as opposed to kind of how it was maybe a little bit easier to do that back then. So I think people make a decision now, maybe just be an athletic trainer or just be a physical therapist, as opposed to to both. But
what's interesting to me, Noel, is I guess I have this general impression that when people decide to go into the medical field, this is something that they've had aspirations for since maybe like they were a child. I'm not hearing from you like you as a youngster, you were like, I want to one day be in the medical field. It sounds like you kind of weaved and transitioned your way through sports and finding your way to the medical field.
Yeah. And I guess there's, more medical than not. And maybe that's just how I would compare myself. If I look at, nursing or other degrees, maybe that's more organic, meaning you're dealing with more systemic diseases. Mm-hmm. Me as a physical therapist, physiotherapist is the kind of the European term. Physical therapist is what we use, in the United States. So on the ATP, you would say physiotherapist is how they use the term. I think it's, maybe more worldwide recognized as that term when you use that term. But like I said, maybe if I was more organized, and when I say that is, I was kind of scared actually when I went to undergrad to take the harder science classes. And because something happened with my math in junior high where it fell off the map. And when I got into chemistry into high school, I was struggling. And if it wasn't for my lab partner, and who was also on the tennis team, I probably wouldn't have passed the class, and I don't know, what happened with my math, but I think even now I think about the math and, and thinking about, going back to PT school, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to go through chemistry and physics if I'm going to do this. So, I worked my tail off, I prayed a lot about it, and, thank the Lord, I passed those classes, because those classes are really weeder outer classes.
Yep.
Unless you're doing those things, like if you're going to be a chemist or physicist and you're working in a lab, you might use some of those techniques. But when you're learning physiology and biomechanics and things like that. I learned those things in undergrad. I had those classes in my master's degree, but I didn't have physics and I didn't have chemistry. So, I mean, you can learn chloride and potassium and magnesium and how a muscle cell contracts necessarily without having to do stoichiometry, and break down chemistry equations. Thankfully, or I wouldn't even got as far as I did. But, in order to, and then when I went back to school, I was in my early 30s when I was taking physics and chemistry. I had taken a job with the USDA in Key Biscayne. And on Monday night from 5 to 8:30, I was taking night classes. And then on the weekend, I was sitting in my apartment or at the beach or on a plane, doing chemistry problems, doing physics problems to take physics 1 and 2, chemistry 1 and 2. And initially I was going to go, I didn't want to be in debt to go to PT school, and that's a whole nother podcast for a whole nother time. But and I was trying to do it through the military. And the military through Army Baylor had a program where they pay for your school and then you have years of service to pay back. Well, you could have done like 4.5 years in the service and then maybe 3 years, in the reserves, but your school was paid for and you got paid. So I'm like, okay, I had a little bit of a loan that one of the members from tennis club where I was teaching, he had a foundation. And, I was, almost not going to grad school and athletic training because I didn't really have the money, and the fellowship that I had the second year wasn't there in my first year. I had an assistantship the first year, which paid for, some things, but not everything. The fellowship paid for everything the second year when I was coaching at Springfield. So there was a gentleman that, actually that lives down here in Miami, had a foundation, and, he goes, don't not go to grad school because of the finances. And I thought he was just, here's a rich guy just saying, hey, just try harder, type of thing. But then, as the summer went on, some of the other members said, hey, he was serious. If you want to go to school, could be some financial help. And I was like, okay. So we talked about it, and he gave me a loan for $10,000, and that bridged the gap with what I didn't have, from the assistantship. And then in the years after I graduated, I paid him back, a set amount of money until I paid it back. And then as it would be, 3 weeks before I started physical therapy school, I had paid the last, loan payment to him, and then jumped back into debt with PT school. So like I'm saying, it was a journey, and I was trying not to have that happen because I was looking at the military and saying, but the military route, they've got good education. It's very musculoskeletal, and the research that the military does. So it wasn't just that. The program there, I had met a guy, an athletic trainer at an athletic training program. And then he was telling me about it. PT had gone to a doctorate, and I was hoping, to, not just, I had a master's degree, and I was hoping, to get a doctorate, but I wasn't so sure about the PhD aspect because the research aspect, I didn't fall in love with that aspect in my master's degree. And that was my research project there was on tennis elbow. So it was kind of a tennis, project, that I had there. And, so that was kind of the route, how I got, and then I was trying to use tennis. I said, if anything I could do in the pro world, even when I was an undergrad, I'd like to work the Olympics, and I'd like to work in pro tennis. I like being around tennis. I like all sports, even now, football, basketball, track, baseball. I could work any of those sports. I've worked in college, sports medicine, and they were smaller schools. And, the fortunate thing, I think, when you work at a smaller school, or unfortunately, because you're working with everybody, so you're very busy, most of the seasons. Whereas bigger schools, I think, they separate you, okay, you're the athletic trainer for football, or you might have 2 sports, a major sport and a minor sport, but then you don't get to work with some of the other athletes. And, where I grew up playing all sports, I kind of have an appreciation for all of it, and I shot basketball 3 days ago, so I consider myself, like that. I can kind of communicate with a basketball player or a soccer player, or, just because of the experience in working, those sports in the collegiate, level. So I can appreciate, all those aspects. And
right. And Noel, a question for you, because you had mentioned that you were kind of doing USTA, and then you were kind of doing classes at night. When was it that you actually started officially working on the tennis tour? As far as when was it when you were doing your undergrad? Was it your master's? Was it the doctorate? When exactly did your official work start from a tennis standpoint?
Well, every job that I had, even collegiate, the collegiate jobs that I had early on, I was also the athletic trainer for tennis. So I would
Ah,
consider those, even as a student athletic trainer, I'm taping the ankles, one ankle for sure, of one of my athletes. And the AD, who was our coach, was like, look at this, this guy taping ankles, one of our own players is taping the ankle of another player, and I had, so even from my undergrad, I was working kind of in tennis, and then every college job, basically I worked in tennis. And my first real like tennis entity outside of collegiate was at the Vandermeer Tennis Academy. And so I had taken a job at a clinic, and the clinic on Hilton Head Island a lot of clinics will do outreach sports medicine to high schools and things like that. They'll hire the athletic trainer and they'll send them out to a school, and then the athletic trainer will have kind of, do some work in the clinic or be assigned, or have some duties in a school or both. And so I was athletic trainer at Vandermeer. So I would work in the clinic helping, the therapists at the time with, rehabbing their patients, leading the exercises and doing modalities and things, which I was kind of frustrating because, I had already had that experience, as a athletic trainer in, the collegiate world, as a head athletic trainer and assistant at a college. And then I come into a clinic and basically, it was kind of like a tech with a master's degree, which is kind of frustrating. And then I'm seeing the therapist work. I'm like, I think I can do what they're doing. And that kind of was some of the things, that kind of spurred me on to pursue also physical therapy. But then, also kind of bridge, some of the gap in between some of the knowledge I felt like would broaden my scope as a PT, adding that to, the athletic training aspect. So, kind of going back, Bryce, to what you were saying. So,
excellent.
yeah.
And so I'm assuming that you then on the tour or one of these resources, like when, a player mid-match has some sort of an issue and they called the trainer, you come out and you assess what's going on and you make some sort of determination of whether this is something you can treat on court or off court. What is that whole process like?
Okay. Let me go back though, because I lost your question like halfway through. I started doing pro tennis work in 2009. I started just working, qualifying for Delray Beach was the first time that Todd Ellenbecker had reached out. And, I'm in Miami, Delray's close. And then, there were some, upper level players that would come through Key Biscayne. Key Biscayne was more so of, kind of players would come in and train and then leave, as opposed to Boca where people were living there. And then, so when I was head athletic trainer there at USTA in Boca, the pro American players that we had, I was working with them, but first pro in terms of working pro tournament was 2009, and then kind of started slowly working some tournaments then. So when you're going back to working, when you're saying, when did you start working in the pros, that was it. And then kind of a trickle, because I was working pro tournaments with my vacation time at my job, the clinic job that I had here in Miami previously. So, whatever vacation time I would save up, I would reach out to Todd, hey, I can work this many tournaments, and I would work those tournaments on my vacation time, so, and that's kind of, led to what I'm doing now. But so you were talking about mindset when you get called out to the court for a medical timeout. Was that the question?
Yeah.
Well, typically you're doing treatment in the training room on someone else when that happens. Okay. So you'll get a call on the radio. So unlike other sports, football, basketball, baseball, you're there on the sideline in those sports. So you get to see the context of kind of what led up to that injury. And then obviously you're the first person out there. I'm the first person out there to examine that injury, and if it's football, you'll see the you'll see the doctors and other medical staff will come out with the athletic trainer, out onto the field. But in tennis, you're doing treatment, so it's like working in a clinic, and then all of a sudden something happens out on the court. Unless, like how I met you guys, you're a rover, like maybe at a Grand Slam, and then if it's more quiet, maybe you can, or not as many matches going on, maybe you're courtside at a match, or maybe as the tournament goes on and there's less and less players and less matches, you can be out there for a match, kind of be courtside. And it always makes it easier when you kind of have the temperature of what led up to what's going on. So typically though, you're on the radio, or you might get a text, you're on the radio, you get a call, players requesting the physio, or play has stopped, and then you're leaving what you're doing and you go out onto the court without having seen what's going on. And then that's when you start what we would call in the healthcare field your subjective history. What happened? What did you feel? What are your symptoms? And you have only a brief time to make that assessment, because it's, the other person is not playing. They're sitting and getting cold. Right. So as opposed to other team sports, okay, sub them out. You get hurt, you try to do an examination. If they can't continue, then you bring them off. Someone else is subbing in. Not in tennis. This other person, is waiting. So it's not like you have all day. So it's not timed for your assessment, but it's kind of supposed to be pretty brief. But if you take a medical timeout, which is you've determined that, okay, I can do some treatment on whatever you're dealing with, I can make a difference with this injury. And then you tell the chair umpire and the supervisor, okay, I'm going to take a medical timeout. And then you're on the clock. Then you have 3 minutes to do your treatment, for that player. And then you get 2 subsequent treatments, either on a changeover or a set break, to try to make some type of difference for that player. So obviously play is not disrupted in that context, because that's on, the break time, so you only have 90 seconds on a changeover, set break. You have 120 seconds, or 2 minutes, to do something. And so that's kind of how that process, plays out, is that you're a little bit blind going out, which makes it more challenging, as opposed to seeing things develop and kind of having a context when you go out. Like if I'm working a basketball game and you have guys crowding the rim, typically I'm going to watch. I'm not a fan. You have a sense of what's going on, but I'm watching how this guy lands. I'm watching the contact or the elbow. How's he going to respond? Is he able to run down the court, or is he limping now? Because I know in just a minute I'm going to be called upon to, to work, so, and then that's going to come down. The coach is going to be asking, can this guy go? Because it's going to affect what he's doing, and how the team is going to compete. So I'm watching all those things. So when you come out on the court, it's different. It's just a different scenario. It's unique in sports medicine world, or unique to my experience. Anyway, working with other sports.
I want now a question I've always had, and I'm actually kind of excited to be able to ask a real professional about this. And I'm not asking for any names. I'm not asking for you to put anybody's business out there. But you hear the conversation sometimes about players using the medical timeouts and gamesmanship. Yeah. Have you ever been called out for a medical timeout, and you're assessing this player and you're thinking in your mind, there ain't nothing wrong with this person. Ain't nothing wrong with them, but you have to be professional and you have to do your job. Have you ever had that thought about a particular situation?
Well, yeah, that's tricky. That's a pretty loaded question. But so my job out there, the player has got to have trust in me. Right. So that's an established, that's a relationship, when I'm treating an athlete in the clinic or I'm treating out on the court, and especially on the court, because they're in the heat of battle. And if they're struggling, you're trying to help them in that context, and they're calling you out there with, hopefully, with that intent. Could there be some other intent? Maybe, But my job is really to believe that player, and to try to make a difference. And so where the rubber meets the road is I've got to try to determine from an objective standpoint what is going on. Okay, so I'm trying to determine something physical that is a problem. So what we have, like you do the history, and just like if you go to the medical doctor, he's listening to what's going on, and you learn in school, well, the diagnosis is made 80% of the time based upon the subjective history, and then you complete your clinical exam. Clinical exam is you're palpating, you're touching whatever is the complaint. You're trying to stress test that area, which is what we call a special test. You're trying to provoke those areas to try to determine, okay, what's wrong? So is it a muscle strain or is it cramping? Well, good question. The player may not even know sometimes what they're experiencing. If they haven't experienced cramping before, which a lot of players have, and you see it happen in other sports, and it happens quite readily, in tennis, you're trying to determine, what, the injury is. Okay, so have there been cases where someone has told me that they weren't honest? Yes. And, but in that context, I kind of had a feel also that it was just recent, actually. It was a medical timeout. And the athlete did tell me that there were two different issues going on. Well, you can take care of one, and then it's like, okay, there's a limited time. And I think you can, according to the rules, if there's two body parts, can you take a medical timeout at one time for both? And I think that can happen. And I would have to dig in and answer that question or ask that question. Even sometimes when the tricky things come up, there's some basic stuff and there's some tricky things. So I would go to like a supervisor and say, hey, this scenario, in that type of case. But he had two things. I treated the one, and he took care of it. He was competing. And then as he sat down again, he asked the chair, hey, I need to see the trainer again. And then he asked me about, the other body part. And I was a little fishy on the other body part based upon the information that it was giving me. I was like, okay, let me just work on the timeout or on the changeover and see how you go, since we already took this other one. So, I mean, the player, you can have a medical timeout for a new condition. So if I sprain an ankle, and I can take a medical timeout for that. And then if I strain my quad, I can take a medical timeout for that. So you can have, I could decide to take a medical timeout for these conditions. But once that has started, you only have two subsequent treatments opportunities for it.
For each or for
yeah,
both?
for each one. Yeah, for each one.
Each one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then sometimes I could treat something on a changeover and not take a medical timeout, knowing that, okay, maybe I could use some additional time for this later on. Let's treat, and then see how we progress, and then maybe okay. The things that get tricky, if you're taping ankle, you're taping different things, 3 minutes, I need to get all my supplies and stuff ready to go. Then tell the chair, okay, I'm ready. And once they know I'm ready, then you're on the clock. So, going back to your question, my job is to believe them and to prove, that a medical timeout is warranted, because I'm held accountable to, the other person that's sitting there also.
Right.
So, I mean, are they faking or not? Does that happen? It can happen. But I mean, I think, you're going based upon a trust relationship, in that context. And then if that trust is breached, still, I'm trying to determine, does whatever that the player is dealing with, how can I assist them? Not whether to determine if they're lying to me or not, because then I'm trying to deal with too many things, so I would go out there with the mindset of, I'm believing what they say, but you do have to be aware of the score. But if I'm aware of the score, where are they at? Then it's like, is there some type of secondary gain here? Could it be? I mean, it could be, in some cases, have I blatantly had someone do that? Not blatantly. I think, like in the other case, the other player said, yeah, I think I was cramping. It's like, well, I was kind of twitching, but I wasn't really sure. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's not so discernible even to the player if they have, because the player said, yeah, I was cramping, but I've watched them play. And so I decided to take a medical timeout on the first injury. And I think what I assessed it to be was what he was dealing with and not crimping, especially for that area. And then the other area, I thought, well, this could be more so on that end of the spectrum. So I did what I could within, the changeover. But then afterwards, a player told me, it's like, I didn't think you would allow me to have a medical timeout if I told you I was cramping. And I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? It's like, regardless of whether you felt like I would give you the timer or whether you could take the time, now you should be honest, number one.
Right.
So we had some learning there. It was younger players like, dude, okay, I can treat you, but I can't take a medical timeout. So, oh, I didn't know that. I'm like, yes, but it shouldn't matter. You should be honest with me regardless. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So it was a good coaching opportunity, for a younger player to say, look, no, this is the rule. And regardless of it, if it's the rule, so it's kind of some character development, along the way also. And, and I was, treating him after the fact in the training room. So he comes in and I'm like, all right, let's talk to, this young guy and, let him know kind of here's the procedure. And if you're going to be a pro, this is how you want to, handle yourself. And so, I think a lot of it has to, if you say gamesmanship and using this, that, and the other, I try not to get into that, because then I'm trying to decide whether the guy is being honest or not. I have to be as objective as possible, because when it comes down to it, hey, what were you treating? Or this is what my decision was, So, ultimately the player knows in their head, and then I'm trying to also discern, to take care of the player as best as I can, So
Right. And Noel, just question for you. So you've been out on the tour, you've been working across multiple sports. From a tennis perspective, what are the typical injuries that you've at least seen and treated, throughout your career?
Yeah, I think cervical issues can, there's a chart. I know there's been research done on it, and I think maybe low back is probably number one.
Okay.
The wear and tear, the rotational, the stops and starts, loading on serving, that type of thing. Shoulder, I think, is, probably number two. Number three, more and more, is like the medial forearm, what we call the flexor pronator group. So in tennis, you have tennis elbow, but typically higher level players aren't getting tennis elbow. Typically, that's a problem that anybody could get. A tennis player could get it, but like repetitive gripping, so that's more so on the outside of the elbow, where you can get some wear and tear, degeneration, some inflammation at the tendinous attachment, where the muscles on the outer forearm, where they attach to the bone. But then on the inside aspect, where the muscles on the inside aspect of the forearm attach, on that bony prominence is where a lot of tennis players get beat up because of the gripping, number one, snapping with serve, either slice or, more so on a topspin, forehand, and that type of thing. So medial forearm, I might put that probably, third on the list. Low back, cervical stuff. People travel a lot, your head's in a funky position, or you're sleeping in different hotel rooms. So the cervical spine, can get beat up. And then, groin, quad, Achilles. Anything has its, no one is coming through without some type of cost physically, in any sport, and at most ages and stages, so, it takes a lot of hours on the court, a lot of hours of practice to get to a high level, and your body changes a lot of, in tennis, it's more overuse and the adaptive changes and the chronic overuse that you get in certain areas, as opposed to, like your other sports, contact sports, you get collision, more opportunities for ankle sprains in basketball, like volleyball, soccer. It happens in tennis, but, maybe not as frequently from an acute injury standpoint. A lot of it's chronic. There's where the manual therapy comes into play quite a bit, and be able to, treat those musculoskeletal conditions, which was one of the reasons why I went back to the PT school, is to add that education in to broaden and widen the scope. And where I went to school at University of St. Augustine, they're kind of known for that. So I pursued that, and and then continue to try to get better, because all those physios on the tour, they're all good in manual therapy, so you got to be able to do those techniques.
And when you talk about like the medial forearm, does this make sense to you? So, and Isaac knows this about me. For years, I thought I had tennis elbow, and I finally went to the doctor one time because it was limiting, and it still kind of does today, how much I can play. And the doctor said, you don't have tennis elbow, you actually have what we call golfer's elbow.
Yeah.
So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I just didn't name it. So tennis is lateral epicondylitis or tennis elbow, but on the inside form, you call it golfer's elbow, and it's a tennis player getting golfer's elbow, which is kind of oxymoronic, I guess you could say. But yeah, it's that repetitive gripping, repetitive snapping from serving, and maybe grips have an effect in how the leverage of the racket and how technique and biomechanics come together, and where the forces come together, at that on the inner aspect. If you were to stand facing forward and put your palms also facing forward, it's called the anatomical position. So the medial forearm would be, what is facing forward, the bony prominence, of that inner aspect of the elbow, and that's a big time area. Wrist problems also, if you want to put that in there as well, probably in category number 4 or 5. But yeah, that's it's pretty prevalent, on the men's side for sure.
Gotcha. And Noel, when you are at a tournament, typically how many physiotherapists are there on the grounds? I mean, is there like a set number, or are you the only one, or how is that managed?
Yeah, well, it depends upon the level of tournament, and the level of tournament kind of determines the number of players.
Right.
To a degree, I think, so a master series, like when you guys saw me, there might be 5 or 6 guys at a tournament at like a master series event or a grand slam. You could have 5 and 6 guys, and then you might have, like at the U.S. Open, I think it's court 17. You'll have someone there because it takes so long to get there. So if you're in the training room, by the time people are sitting there, then all this time, and then you got TV that's involved, and that type of thing. So you have somebody that's stationed there, and then on the grounds also. So like at Indian Wells, there was somebody in the second stadium, and then I was, we rotated, but I was out there at the time when we all met, and then you had like 3 or 4 guys that were in the training room treating, all the other guys, that are coming either going out or coming back in. So it could be 5 or 6 at a Master Series event, and probably same for a Grand Slam. So 128 draw, you need, and then there's a lot of guys, at those events that might have some people as well. So, that helps to kind of reduce it, but only by, a few, because not everybody has, their own private physio, taking care of them. So
right. And that was actually going to be my follow-up question to you is, have you actually been a PT for any specific player, or has it just been for the USTA and or ATP? Because I'm not sure if you do WTA, right?
No, I haven't. Nothing. No work. There. Just ATP and USTA. So in that context, really, it's more of a traditional healthcare provider for the whole team, and that's also a unique aspect of tennis, because the whole team is each person is their own individual team. So you're treating everybody that comes through the door that needs treatment and care, and I think that's where that comes back to that trust on the court in those medical timeouts. You're developing trust with the player all through, just like you would in any medical context. They need to be able to to trust you, and so setting it up in an adversarial way of, I think you're faking, would be like a bit funky. Does it happen? It can happen, but within that context of the heat of the battle, given the benefit of the doubt. But But for individual player, no, not necessarily. Track and field, yes, but not in tennis.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, and I think that that's a good segue. I mean, that one of the things that we had talked about when we met was the fact that you were working with a track and field Olympiad, and someone who has previously medaled in the Olympics and was actually ran this past 2020/2021 Olympics. Want to let our listeners know or provide some insight into that?
The athlete's Shelly-Ann Fraser-Price, and she's a Jamaican sprinter, and had treated her for some time. There was an agent in Jamaica, and he would bring athletes up to the clinic in Miami. So we would be providers for them while we're there, and they'd go back to Jamaica and get more care there. And had treated Chilean for a few years, and leading up to the Olympics, this year, we started talking back in probably September of 2019 about, maybe, doing more full time. And kind of as time, progressed, I was going down, doing some treatment, coming back up to Miami, and, eventually made the decision, to go down full time this past May, hoping, to be able to be with her there at the Olympics. So, but I knew that wasn't guaranteed, when I went down there, so it wasn't like, yeah, for sure you come to the Olympics. So as it had, COVID still having an effect, and, I couldn't, they wouldn't allow any private staff, if you want to put it that way, with a particular athlete in the Olympic Village. No one was staying outside of the Olympic Village. And so when that came to light, hey, you won't be able to go, with me, on my own. Her and her coach asked if I could be named to the team. And, Jamaica ended up taking 7 massage therapists and no physiotherapists, to Tokyo. So that, got cut short. So worked from like mid-May until like, later in July, when they ended up going over. And, unfortunately didn't get the opportunity, to work in the Olympics there. There were a few other athletes I had also treated when I was down there in Jamaica, that were on the team. And, so I had a good rapport with them. And then, some other athletes along the way, if we were at a meet, someplace in the summer, I might treat, a person here or there that a coach had requested, from her, if I could be involved in some treatment on their athlete. And, so it was good. It was a, neat experience. I mean, like I said, I ran, cross country, I had always been a runner,
Right.
from a young kid. So I always had a love of running. And then, with the Jamaican sprinters would come up, it was always fun to kind of, talk to them, or trash talk, really, because I mean, at that point it's Jamaica against USA. And so it's always, you try to kid and talk trash, and, Shelly-Ann's a world beater. So, you just try to say, nothing you say is going to go anywhere, but it's like, just to kind of, give her a little bit of a hard time. So, it was kind of like that. And I did my volunteer to work with the Olympic Committee with the US. You've got to do your volunteer time. So it's a little over a 2-week volunteer at one of the Olympic training centers. And I did mine in 2013 in hoping that I could work Rio, and in 2016. And then it just never, came about, to be able to work Rio. And then, so, to have an opportunity to work with, obviously, Shelly-Ann, was a huge opportunity. And, great attitude, hard worker, big time, was a special thing. And for her to, to kind of, trust me in that way was, was a blessing, really. So, and she'll, defend her world title. She won the world championship in 2019 for the 100. And, she'll have, competition there for sure with her, countrywomen in Jamaica. And then,
Right.
world other people trying to get on that podium as well. So, but she's working hard now.
Absolutely.
To do her best, to give herself the best opportunity. So, and it's, sacrifice. No one, pro tennis, college sports, none of that. It's all, it goes down to, to sacrifice, to want. There's a book I read named, the title's Grit, a very good book. And, it talks about, the dedication and the desire that you have to have, and talks about talent. People talk a lot about talent, but the equation in the book that I felt like made a difference. And kind of going back, you talking about going to school, and all the different education, it was the equation to success was that effort counted twice. It was the passion that someone had, to pursue a certain activity, and then it was the effort. So I don't remember the equation exactly, but it was, if it's like talent plus effort equals skill plus effort equals achievement, something like that. And, it's comforting to know that maybe you might not be the best, but if you're willing to sacrifice and work hard, you can, you can do pretty well and achieve, you can achieve some goals. So, and no one out there, that's competing at those high levels, it's almost, you wouldn't say badge of honor, but you get beat up because of all the effort that it takes, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, my friend, you talk about talent, skill, and effort. Based on what you've shared,
right.
You've got an abundance of that, man. I mean, it's incredible, Noel. I mean, what you have gone through, again, your athletics, as well as all of the studies you've done, all of the work that you've put in. It's an incredible career that you have established, and your path to getting to this point, in my opinion, is absolutely phenomenal. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I would, give credit to the Lord for sure, giving me,
absolutely,
the desire to do it, the ability to do it, opening doors. So I would give him credit first and foremost. And I think that, from a faith-based perspective, he gives you things that you like to do and are talented towards, and not if I do this, God does this.
Right.
Type of scenario. But I think that, if he's built you a certain way and you're working and pursuing and living your life, for him, and, trying to honor him in that way, that, that he'll allow you to, if you're doing it, I think, and it's what I try to do as a kind of as a servant, so in using what I do professionally in service to the Lord, is kind of is how I see it. So, from a Christian perspective, you need high level performers. Not that I'm saying that I'm a high level performer, because I would say that all those guys on the tour, are very high level, and I'm probably the weakest one. But, you gotta, the sacrifice to do it. And I think he has created and opened the doors and the opportunities for it, so, I'd give, you got to put the effort in, and I think I'd give the credit to him for sure, first and foremost.
Well, I think
I love that perspective.
Yes, sir. I think you're incredibly humble.
Right.
Well,
which is key. That is key. Humility is key. Definitely. Go ahead, Bryce.
No, that I totally agree with you. I just loved hearing that perspective. And so, Noel, we get a bit of a picture of your background and what you've done and what you're doing. We're at the end of the year now, and we're heading into 2022. What's on the roadmap for you next year?
Well, I'm working more so with the ATP as a contractor. I'm not full-time, with them, but this year, tentatively, I'll work 18 tournaments. So when I left the clinic, I was, like I said, I was doing that on my vacation time, but working and leaving with Shelly Ann, kind of opened the door to work more on the pro side. And then, we'll see, still doing some work with Shelly Ann and see, what she needs next year. And then, I've been doing some private client work, here in Miami, and then, we'll see, how it can, work out. I was working with, just so happened, one of my former coworkers does work with Inter Miami, and he goes up and rehabs the guys there a couple days a week. And then a guy from another club, physio reached out to him, and he couldn't treat this one player, so he asked me if I treated a player. So I was treating with, an MLS guy, a week and a half ago, So opportunities could come up, that way in the off weeks. Doing some work at a clinic also here in Miami, and we'll see. So it's a bit more, I guess, disjointed as opposed to what I'm used to. But going back to prayer, I prayed a lot about leaving, the clinic that I was at, and so I think this is, living by faith for sure. For next year to see, how things develop. So that's what's on the horizon. I'll work ATP Cup. I'll leave on the 28th. And I'll work, that and come back. And then at the end of January, scheduled for Pune and then Del Rey. And then that's February, March, Indian Wells again. So maybe I'll see you guys out there again with Jaime.
Yes.
You will.
In March.
You definitely will.
Okay.
That's right.
Jaime's keeping everything under control out there. And then, other events throughout the summer hardcore. And so that's the plan for right now.
That's a beautiful thing. Noel, I tell you what, man, this has been incredible in my opinion. I love talking with you. We so enjoyed talking with you when we initially met you in Indian Wells. And I think there was just an initial vibe that both Bryce and I felt about you, and having you on the show, talking about your background, talking about your path is in my opinion, it's just been wonderful. And I thank you for your willingness to, share your background and share the things that you do. And as well, just a great guy and great character, man. We appreciate you a lot, my friend.
And what you do for our show is that one of our kind of missions, if you will, is we try to highlight aspects of the professional tennis world that don't get as much coverage in the larger media markets.
That's right.
And so I don't know how many people get to hear the perspective of the training area and the physio area. And when we go into our shows or interviews, sometimes we have these preconceived notions of what the show is going to be like. And I must say, this interview has been definitely different than what I thought it was going to be. Your story should be told more often, just not about being a trainer, but about, this is not the path that you picked out for your life when you were 5 years old. And so the journey that you've taken, and then, it's an inspirational story for people that, the path is not always real smooth, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
you talked about having financial challenges and trying to decide, what should you do or what you shouldn't do. And then you hit me with the whammy and you come with the strong faith game, which, I'm totally a believer in, and the power of that and how that alone can make a difference in your personal and professional journey. So I just think your story is incredible, and I am so glad that we're having an opportunity to tell it.
Well, thanks for having me on, and I appreciate it. It was great meeting you guys, and thanks for giving me an opportunity just to to share a little bit. And I don't know what else to say, but Merry Christmas and
Awesome. Well, like I said, Noel, it was awesome having you on with us, and we look forward to talking with you and collaborating with you more as we go forward. So this is not it, y'all. We will definitely have more from Noel in the future. That is for sure.
Yes. And speaking about having more, this is not our last episode for the year. We have one more episode after this one, and you know which one it is. It is our Brothers on Tennis 2021 Awards Show. We'll be bringing that to you next week. You don't want to miss it. You may think you know who's going to win each category this year, but I promise you, some of them will definitely be a surprise. So, Noel, once again, thank you for being on the show. Can't wait to see you again in person. And Isaac, I'm going to go ahead and say on behalf of the podcast and for Noel, Gressner. This has been your boy Bryce.
And this is your boy Isaac.
And we are Brothers on Tennis. Everyone, be safe out there.